We have with us Mr. Sunjay Kapur, President of the Automotive Manufacturers Components Association of India. Mr. Kapur, can you give us an update on the auto component sector, especially in terms of the looming threat of electric vehicles? So how would the ICE sector, the component sector, do in the current scenario?
I will give you an update on the automotive sector with the opportunities of electric vehicles as opposed to the threat, because it's not a threat. It's really an opportunity that we're going to see. The auto component sector has had good growth compared to the last. I mean, in the last year we grew 23%, pre-pandemic levels, to almost $56.7 billion. We saw an export of growth of 43% at $19 billion. And for the first time ever, we've had a trade surplus. So which is really, the first time in our history. So it is definitely a positive. We've seen a lot of opportunities come, whether it be because of China Plus One, or it be the fact that we have had sourcing opportunities outside of India, and therefore our exports have grown. We don't see why we will not see this kind of growth going forward. If everything remains the same, we should see this kind of growth going forward. In the domestic industry specifically, we've seen a 20% increase in passenger car and a 30% increase in commercial vehicles. So it's definitely looking much better than it was from before. Again, there's been a lot of technology disruption in the automotive space per se and as a whole. And when I talk about the automotive space, I'm really talking about it from a global perspective. We've seen a lot of technology disruption, and that's brought about a lot of opportunities, not just from the vehicle, but the ecosystem as well. So if you look at the vehicle, what's changing, in terms of, one is the electrification of the vehicle. The second is connectivity. Then we go on to telematics. The kind of technology being adopted in vehicles is changing drastically across the world, and that's slowly being adopted in India as well. When you look at cars that are smart cars, that's increasing as well. Then if you look at the ecosystem that comes along with that change, or the requirement of the ecosystem, and when I talk specifically about EVs, you look at battery technology, charging infrastructure, all these are opportunities that are being created. When you take ICE, to go back to your question, ICE is not going away per se. And we're going to see that continue for quite some time, specifically in India. Passenger car outside of India, yes, several car companies or OEMs have announced that they will go electric and not build the ICE vehicles any longer. So that becomes an opportunity for Indian component suppliers to supply to as well, where the ICE still exists. And then, of course, when you look at India specifically, the two-wheeler and the three-wheeler industry is rapidly changing to electric. Three-wheeler today is already 50% is electric. Two-wheeler and three-wheeler will go electric much faster. Buses will go electric. Commercial transport will go electric. So it's all pointing in the right direction. A large part of the vehicle will remain the same, because if you look at components that go into ICE, they will also go into electric vehicle, other than the engine and transmission.
The new phase of the BS6 is expected to drive up prices of especially diesel cars again. Wouldn't that make an impact on passenger vehicle sales, especially given the rising inflation and lower purchasing power and threats of a recession?
Globally, diesel engines are dead. I mean, you're not going to see a lot of diesel vehicles. Most OEMs are discontinuing that. But if you look at India, the macros are very strong. If you look at the kind of sales that we've seen, and even in the or the build up to the festive season, we're seeing good sales and good growth. So we hope that this continues. I mean, we've seen a growth from last year as well. When it comes to most segments, almost all segments, and we'll continue to see a growth here.
What kind of growth you're expecting for both passenger vehicles and two-wheelers this
So
fiscal?
we're expecting double-digit growth.
In both two-wheelers and
Well, in passenger car, two-wheelers, it's a little soon to say, but we've seen some growth, and we hope that growth continues. We've already seen 20% growth, continuously, even in pasca. So we expect growth in this fiscal as well.
Are component makers facing pressure on margins because of the price pressure and the kind of I mean, I understand now things are going well because after 2 years people are coming back to purchase maybe from savings, but as we go next year there is threats of a global recession, impact on the rupee and impact on India. Do you see that affecting component suppliers?
Wow, that's an economist question to answer about the global recession and the impact on the rupee. However, let me put it this way: that the industry is very resilient. Number one. Number two, we've reached a stage where we're building a very efficient businesses, and therefore I don't see any real. Where we are continuously improving margins or sort of improving our cost structures, and therefore are able to hold on to our margins. So I don't see any major change in that from an industry perspective.
You spoke of a trade surplus for the first time. You spoke of exciting export opportunities and huge exports. Do you see that? Do you see the same thing going forward for two reasons? One is globally, there is a shift, at least in the developed markets, towards EVs in an aggressive fashion. Especially after the Russia-Ukraine war, there's a much more emphasis on alternate fuels. So where do you see export markets for Indian component makers in this shift?
So our largest export market is the US, and I think that'll continue. We will continue to, we've investing heavily in technology. So if you now look at the government PLI schemes, they're all geared towards investment in future technologies. As we invest in future technologies, we have two benefits there. One is the deep localization benefit, which allows us to not be dependent on other countries or dependent on imports, and therefore, again, going back to trade surplus, and the opportunity to export. Now, when you look at electric vehicles and all the investments that companies in India are making, the capex cycle that's already kicked in, we need to have a large market to supply into. And therefore, India is a very small market from that perspective in terms of volume of EV. So when we really want to tap into the market, we're looking at exports as an opportunity. And that's why I said, with the growth of 43% in exports, we hope that this continues. We've got a lot of international purchase organizations or offices, as they call them, IPOs, in India, sourcing for OEMs as well as tier one suppliers. That is again an opportunity for the component industry to supply into. Having said that, and I continuously say this, it is our role really to invest in technology. And the more we invest in technology, the more opportunities that will open up for us as a country, as a manufacturing base, as a manufacturing economy. Because one is, the make in India. The other part that is more critical from my perspective is design in India. And once this continues, we'll see more export opportunities. ACMA and CIAM are working together to localize parts. So we're working on projects together to see how we can increase the localization in India, and therefore again have a stronger trade surplus than we've had so far.
You speak of localization. I just wanted to know, let's take a two-wheeler and a passenger vehicle. What is the percentage of localization currently in these vehicles?
It really depends from vehicle to vehicle. I can't answer that question because it's a general question. So different OEMs will have different local content. Have the answer from what the OEM's local content is. We can check on that. However, the drive for localization even for a Suzuki started back in 2008, Frankly, when we went to the 2008 financial crisis, the foreign exchange fluctuation was so high that, and the volatility was so high that, we started looking at localization. Suzuki, MSIL, Maruti Suzuki in particular, has a lot of programs for localization of components, whether it's inner part localization, whether it's tier 2 upgradation through localization, etc. So there's a lot of programs that are happening, from a very long time, and suppliers have been constantly localizing parts. So I would say a majority of the parts are localized.
Are you also able to do it for the luxury segment, Range Rovers, Mercedes, BMWs? I understand the volumes are low.
Depends on what's produced in India. And don't forget, what's happening with component suppliers today, fortunately, because we have invested in technology, we're able to supply globally. Again, and this is reflective of the kind of exports that we've had. We're able to supply globally, and if we're able to supply globally, we're able to meet the volume requirements.
Does the falling rupee help push your exports further?
Again, it depends on whether this is a pass-through or not.
Okay.
In some cases, if it's a pass-through, it doesn't. If it's not a pass-through, of course it helps.
You spoke of opportunities in the EV space, but it seems that the number of components in an ICE vehicle is much more than in an EV vehicle. So how do you see that panning out? For the reason I ask is that there are so many mom and pop shops, especially for two-wheelers in India, and basically it is import everything from China and just put it together and sell it. So are Indian component makers not able to substitute Chinese components in the EV space at the moment?
The short answer is they are able to. It may have been a volume issue to begin with, and that's going to change very rapidly. And that's the case in any in any transitional phase. It's a volume issue initially, and then as the volumes sort of start going up, you're able to localize and you're able to justify the economies of scale. So I feel that all that will change, because we have the ability and the capability to supply, into the OEMs in India, and therefore the imports will reduce as we increase, as the volumes increase, and we're able to meet the capex required to put up capacity.
So there's a controversy has come out recently for the EVs, especially with respect to the FAME2 subsidies, where the government is investigating some companies for short-circuiting the process and relying more on imports rather than localization, which is one of the conditions for FAME2. Isn't this a big opportunity for the Indian component industry?
Let me put this in another way. The 70%, or let's start with 50% of the vehicle is the same. The other 50%, 30% of the vehicle will also remain the same with certain different requirements. And those may be in terms of torque required, or those may be in terms of, material, finish, etc. The remainder, which is engine, will go away. So the notion shouldn't be that, you needed so many components. Now you've gone EV, you don't need anything. No, that shouldn't be the notion. So a seat or a headlight or a steering, all that is going to be still required. Motors may change. The requirement for motors may change. Traction motors, starter motors will move to traction motors, or those motors will be more relevant. And a lot of people are working on motor technologies, whether they be through joint venture or alliance partners. And then again, the add-on is the ecosystem. And the add-on is what was never available in a vehicle earlier, whether it's ICE or EV. We didn't have the kind of connectivity that we have today. The challenge of cybersecurity, which is again another opportunity. Then there is data analytics, which is again another opportunity. So there's so many different opportunities that are emerging.
It seems the opportunities are more on the software side rather than the hardware side.
Yes.
Isn't the Indian auto component industry more hardware oriented at the moment?
At the moment it is, but that's about to change. I mean, if you look at, even in ACMA, we have onboarded 2 non-automotive companies into the executive committee. and they're both from the electronics field. So now if you take electronics, it's going to go, it's going to become very, very important for us to localize in that field as well. And then you look at the rollout of 5G, there's a world of difference that's going to occur in the automotive industry, and therefore the disruption is going to sort of be, is going to just continuously increase. So forgings will exist, sheet metal will exist, casting will exist. Will we change materials? Yes. Will we move, let's say, to carbon fiber? Possibly. Will we move from aluminum to titanium? Will we move from steel to aluminum? Possibly. So that's the shift that'll happen. Will we have software players in the industry? Yes. And therefore, will the competitive landscape of our industry change? Absolutely. When we looked at the PLI schemes, they have automotive and non-automotive players entering into in the PLI scheme, because they could be, parallel tracks in terms of what you're saying, from hardware moving to software.
What kind of government policies you think is needed for the component manufacturing industry now? Anything you have in mind, especially with the budget, again, not round the corner, but at least...
So, I feel that the government has been extremely supportive of the auto component industry. I think if you look at the PLI schemes, you look at ACC battery, you look at FAME2, we're almost sitting at 54,000 crores. It's $8.5 billion. I think it's a great support. We're being pushed in the right direction, to invest in future technologies. Private sector's role is to invest in future technologies. And I feel infrastructure, from an infrastructure point of view, yes, there could be a push when it comes to charging infrastructure, right? It's already, so if you look at what's happening today with the two-wheelers, the distance that they travel, the charging infrastructure is fine. Sure. It's not really a challenge. You don't need to worry about range anxiety, etc., because you're traveling within the city limits. Now, as that increases, as four-wheelers or passenger cars, buses, they start going more electric for commercial vehicle, from a commercial vehicle perspective, you're going to require charging infrastructure. And therefore, I think that's where companies, private sector, as well as government, will have to play a role on how to roll out that infrastructure. So and then, the only other thing I could really talk about from help is financing. How can we make this priority lending? There's a lot of apprehension about lending to, startups, etc., really from the two-wheeler EV space. And if that can become priority lending, we're sitting in a good space. But we're very happy and with what the government is already doing. And we're very hopeful about all the positivity that's coming towards the industry or in the industry.
One last question. This is from the renewable space, which could apply to the auto sector. From April onwards, the government had increased import duties on import of solar modules, and also brought out a list which mandates purchase of modules only from domestic manufacturers. That, I believe, was needed to spur investments, because even with the PLI scheme, the Chinese threat was big enough. Now, do you see something like that being needed for the auto sector or auto component sector, where the government mandates local purchasing instead of imports? You think something like that for 2-3 years will help spur investments further?
I'm not a big fan of that. Because again, if we don't invest in technology, we're really going to get left behind. So, for us to get into a system where, government mandates that a certain percentage has to be bought locally and we don't have the tech for it, it's not going to get us anywhere. I would rather the government do what they're doing in terms of saying, here you go, here's an incentive. If you invest in technology, you're going to get an incentive. Give us that incentive. Allow us to, or encourage us to invest in technology, and therefore encourage us to supply to the world. We should be creating an automotive manufacturing hub in India to supply to the world. That's really where we need to go, and that's the vision of the auto component industry from my perspective. And how can we really create that that hub here so that can supply it into the rest of the world. Because, we have the capability, we have the ability, we have the manufacturing capability as well. And we are able to develop technology. So we should be, comparable to an industry anywhere in the world, not just India.
Thank you very much, sir. Thanks a lot for your time. And you seem very positive about the industry. And let's hope it goes that way.
Yeah, let's hope so.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.